This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook, and today is April 14th, 2024. I have two guests with me today, and I am so super excited about it. I'm going to try to keep my enthusiasm down, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves while I squeal in delight. Welcome, guys. Thanks.
Thanks for having us. Hi there. I'm Sharon Sperber. Used to be Sharon Jaffe. I was at WRHU from 1986 when I was in high school through sometime mid-late 1993, and I'm class of 1991. I'm thrilled to be here.
And I'm Stephen Klapow. I was at Hofstra from 1986 to 1990. I got involved with WRHU around 88, and I actually continued on with the station until 1993.
Thank you so much, both for coming back and talking to me. I talked to you both separately, and I've said this before in other interviews and other things, and I'm just going to gush here at the beginning. You two were so instrumental in my getting established and comfortable at the station when I became airwave producer at the end of my freshman year in 1991. I knew I didn't know nearly enough, and the two of you were sort of my guardian angels of airwave in guiding me and giving me a little bit more knowledge. And you were both so generous and so much fun to talk to you about the music. So these are the moments in your life that change everything. Those are the moments, and it's always been very meaningful to me. So let me conclude my gushing and say thank you and thank you. And I don't know how much you guys remember about that time period. You were both obviously graduated by that point, but it was very meaningful to me, obviously, because I'm still excited about it.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. It means a lot, to hear that from people because I don't remember a ton from back then, but it's nice. It's nice to hear it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I ran out to the library and got a copy of the Trouser Press Record Guide, which I would spend hours and days with, flipping through pages and saying, well, who's this and who's that? And, your recommendations and what you guys played on your shows and your playlists. But all right, I'm gonna stop here and let's start with the questions. I thought of this last minute, but I thought it would be kind of fun to discuss. Who were your musical influences? I guess maybe Stephen, we'll start with you. Who are the people that gave you things to listen to that sort of influenced what you liked?
So, I mean, I prior to working at the radio station, just so I guess in my the getting getting really into music and becoming sort of obsessed with it like you do in your teenage years, I think I was very influenced by my older brother, who's almost 10 years older than I am,
Mm.
because he, was very into music, and he would take me record shopping, and we would go down to St. Mark's and go to places like Sounds and all the record stores in the city. And he introduced me to the B-52s and Missing Persons. And the first time I ever heard Berlin was, from him. And this was before you saw them on MTV or even heard them on the radio. So I would say, like, probably having older siblings who were that much older and into music for me was a huge influence. And aside from my brother, I think, and Sharon might agree with this too, any John Hughes films.
Hmm.
I think John Hughes films were such an influence with music because I would hear songs there that I just could not hear anywhere else, and they immediately would catch me, and then I needed to know more, and then I had to look for the record and so forth.
Yeah, I had an older brother and an older sister. They were more classic rock. My sister was 9 years older than me, and she was more into the Beatles and Elton John. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those artists. My brother, Cheap Trick, Tom Petty, The Who. And I remember I was around 11 and I remember hearing a song on the radio and I asked him, who sings da do 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 da 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 da? And
Mm.
he told me that was the Police. And then that was 1981 and that was MTV and Duran Duran showed up on screen. And as I would flip around the dial, there was a station a couple beats up the way that played songs other than Rio and Girls on Film and Planet Earth and Hungry Like the Wolf. And I was like, wow. So I discovered a lot of music through that radio station, and also discovered other college radio stations, including WRHU. And then I was into pen pals. So pen pals were a really big thing around the time I was like 13, 14. And Duran Duran was always the thread that connected me.
Mm.
And there's a thing, I don't know if either of you guys are into pen pals at all, but I will let you in on something called friendship books. And that was something that we would make, and you would put your name and your address, and sometimes you used an alias, and you'd write down what kind of music you were into. And so you would then send that to your pen pal, and you would see what other people wrote down. And that's kind of how I learned about music. I bought Star Hits and other magazines like that. So while I had older siblings, I actually discovered music that they weren't into. So I kind of found it on my own.
Wow, it's like the internet before the internet.
That
Exactly.
you just reminded me. I had forgotten all about it. There was a pen pal service, but they would connect people who were overseas. And
Mm-hmm.
so I remember actually, and I think they advertised it in Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I had two pen pals who were over in England, and we started, and it was not a cheap thing, but we would
Mm-mm.
send mixtapes to each other in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also had an influence on me, because a lot of what would chart there did not chart here, or we would be following it by like a year.
Exactly.
So my interest in Kate Bush, for example, really came from a tape that I got from a pen pal over there. And so that was an influence too, but until we were just talking about it, I forgot all about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had my pen pals started, I think there was like an ad in the back of Star Hits, and I wrote to somebody, and I guess that person was inundated that they just kind of like passed the letters they received to other people. And so I started with one, and I eventually had like somewhere between 20 and 40 pen pals around the United States, a handful around in England. I only wanted them in England, but I think I had one or two in like Scotland, Ireland, England. And I lost touch with most of them, but there was one that we reconnected on Facebook, and I remember she had made me a mixtape. That's kind of like where I learned about Bauhaus and a lot of goth. So yeah, it was a very different way to discover music. It was certainly word of mouth.
Wow, that is amazing. That's very cool. Thank you for sharing all that. You guys kind of hinted at both these things, but when you started at Hofstra Radio, who were the bands that you were listening to that sort of drew you towards like the airwave program?
Well, for me, I think for years before I was, and they're sort of on the more mainstream side of alternative, but I had been a huge Smiths fan, New Order, Cocteau Twins, Susie and the Banshees, Bauhaus for years. So I was aware of them, and I think the fact that at Hofstra they were playing them at the radio station, but probably taking deeper dives on all of those albums is what appealed to me, and that those were the bands I was listening to at the time.
Mm.
Yeah, and just remembering, how did I get at Hofstra's radio station? When I was in high school, yeah, I was through a pen pal actually. She lived in, I think, Seaford, and she told me she was getting her broadcast engineer's license from WRHU, and I was like, "Wow, that sounds really cool." And so she told me about it, and that's actually how I wound up getting in through a pen pal. But to Steven's point, listening to the same music in the mid late '80s. Liked listening to Airwave and all that kind of, and because of the deeper cuts, that was certainly what was most appealing to me. Yeah, I mean, I was listening to all the same stuff.
So this is sort of a two-part question here because I asked you guys about in advance what were some of the most memorable concerts you attended during that period. But if I could double back, do you remember your first concert that you ever went to and combine
Ever
both?
like
Yeah, yeah. What'd you
Of
your first?
course.
Yeah.
pre airwave. So I grew up in spending summers and school breaks on Long Island, not far from Hofstra. But during the school year, I was down in Florida, and my first concert was the Go Go's, and In Excess opened for them.
Oh my
Oh wow,
God. Wow.
Yeah, I think it was like 1982, maybe. It was in Fort Lauderdale. I remember that.
that sounds right. That's
Wow.
awesome. Mine was I used to know the date by heart. It was like April 3rd, April 4th, something like that. Nassau Coliseum, Duran Duran 7 and the Ragged Tiger tour. So that was my first. And then the next couple that I went to after that was March of 85, Depeche Mode at the Beacon Theater, and then April of 85. And that's really when I just started going to concerts all the time as much as I could. And then U2 at the Coliseum. And that summer, I remember seeing Berlin open for the Thompson Twins at Jones Beach. And that was the first time I ever experienced people going to a concert for the opener and leaving.
Wow.
I was like, wait, we forgot about the Thompson Twins. Don't you want to hear Into the Gap?
Right.
Wow, that's those are pretty amazing early concerts to go to. So I guess let's shift our focus. Stephen, if you remember, were there any memorable concerts that you went to during that time period, or were any of them like part of the station?
Any concert that I went to would routinely be on an RHU playlist. But one of the most memorable concerts that I remember going to, and I kind of love that this happened. I saw Nine Inch Nails as an opener for the Jesus and Mary Chain, and like really nobody knew who they were at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and they've eclipsed Jesus and Mary Chain, obviously. Um, so that was amazing, and it was a fantastic show. But like they had a lot of mega bill shows at the time, like the Cure Disintegration tour, because
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Disintegration came out in, I think it was like 89.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going with people from the station to, it was Giant Stadium at the time, and it was Pixies, Love and Rockets, and Shelley and Orphan. And I don't know why I
Mm-hmm.
remember that. Um,
I still have the
and
shirt.
oh, you do? It's
Yeah.
probably worth a fortune now. And at Jones Beach, that I think it was like summer of '89, the Sugar Cubes and Public Image Limited and New Order
Yeah.
were at Jones Beach, and
Mm-hmm.
that was also like that show really stands out to me as super memorable.
Yeah. I saw Nine Inch Nails open up for Peter Murphy at the Ritz. And
Okay.
I will say, so I had a friend that used to get me some music, and I did have I will admit this, I had the 12-inch of Down in It. I don't think any other radio stations, I can't speak for other college stations, but I know there were no other commercial stations at that time playing it, and I played it on RHU, and I know the station didn't have it at that time. I was not a big fan of it, but I knew it was good and I knew that other people would like it. And I used to play it all the time, just speaking about Nine Inch Nails in particular. But yeah, there were so many amazing mega bills like that. And I was at that Pill Sugar Cubes New Order show and also the Cure at Giant Stadium. And it was, I hate saying this. Mark Maron used to make a joke about like his father-in-law saying this exact quote. It was a different time.
Hmm.
It's like,
Hmm.
but it was so different and so magical in a lot of ways because we were part of this group of people that knew about music before it got hugely
Mhm.
popular. And I don't know, I'm not saying it was better or worse, it was just different. Like you knew who your people were, you could look around a room and you could spot them, and not just
Yeah,
because of what they were wearing.
yeah, I completely agree with that. And it was, for me, it was sort of weird. You wanted to see a band that you loved succeed. So, like you want that, but then all of a sudden a top 40 station starts playing Love and Rockets, and it's
Hmm.
like I don't really know how I feel about that.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was, and that was when you were starting to see more and more bleeds. A lot of well, I mean, new wave, it wasn't such a jump, but like suddenly Erasure was top 40, suddenly Depeche Mode was top 40. It was it started to happen more and more, I think,
Hmm.
around the time that we were at RHU. And so that there was a bit of a shift there,
Hmm.
where what was considered alternative wasn't really so separate from everything else now. And I don't even think people really use that term at all for music because everything is just so blended now.
Yeah, I would agree. It was an early '90s thing, but one thing I think we were super lucky about being on Long Island is that we would get a lot of acts playing at different clubs, and there were a lot of club nights to go to that played music.
Yeah.
And I mean, granted, I was underage and I had fake ID, but everybody did.
Hmm.
So it was fun, and that I would even say that was probably another way of hearing new stuff that you wouldn't necessarily hear on the radio.
Oh yeah, it's true. It's funny how Long Island was just this little microcosm because people make fun of Long Island all the time, but think of all the the just the concentration of clubs. You had Spit and you had Spies and you had Malibu and you had Heaven out in Suffolk County and
And
that's
Paris, 007, and
yeah,
Rush.
right.
Yeah.
So and it's just so funny because it's this suburb, but we really were very rich in places we could go to hear good music, and so we were very lucky in that regard.
Absolutely.
If I could double back a little bit about that sort of the difference between the scenes back then and today. When I teach high school now and my students, they'll go to the Taylor Swift concerts and Olivia Rodrigo, and it's sort of everybody is aware of these bands. And obviously they're huge bands, but everyone's sort of aware of the same things. Whereas I think at that point there were top 40, Bon Jovi kind of bands. And then there was the alternative scene, and they didn't really mix over. And yet, these college radio bands or alternative bands, whatever label you want to put on, they were still immensely popular. You still filled up Jones Beach or these significant venues with lots of people coming out. And I don't know if you can speak a little bit more to that because it's like you said, it was a different time.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely a different time. It was
It was very things were very I think things were very divided up. You had these sort of microcosms of different kinds of music and the people who were into them. And we had it's not like all right, so we have Taylor Swift now. It's not like we didn't have people who were huge. Boy bands started to become huge around then. You had the New Kids on the Block and so forth. And they were sort of the way that I guess they were regarded the way Taylor Swift is now.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, that sort of and everybody knew who they were. So that I think always existed. It's just I feel like the number of people who are into somebody like Taylor Swift is just so much broader. I think you find people who might not typically be into top 40 music, but they somehow they feel like Taylor Swift is acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for me, I remember when I went to see Depeche Mode and I wore my Depeche Mode shirt to school the next day, of course, everybody was asking, not everybody, but a lot of people were asking me, what's Depeche Mode? And I'm like, you'll find out.
Hmm.
And the other thing I forgot that was very influential for me, so I was very fortunate. I was in the high school band, and despite what most people think, band was really cool where I grew up. Like everybody wanted to be in band. Um, Ask anybody that graduated from Long Beach High School in the 80s, and they will tell you we were all cool. And in 1984, when I was a freshman, we went to London as a band trip. And I was really getting into Duran Duran and the alternative bands at that time, other alternative new wave bands, and was really into my pen pals. Met a boy there, not anything romantic. He was a young kid. I met him at like a theater show, but became pen pals with him. And, that really changed me and my life and how I wanted to dress and be a different person. And knowing about, like, I came back with neon colors. Nobody else was wearing neon colors except a couple of people that also, gravitated towards that in band. So looking different, being into things that other people didn't know about, that really spoke to me. Not because like I was like, oh, I'm cooler than you. I just kind of thought like this is kind of cool to know about this stuff. And so it was fun and exciting to, kind of be on the cutting edge of trends and music that eventually might explode. So it was definitely different, and it was fun to hear about this stuff. Whereas now I think, kids are digging through like TikTok and YouTube,
Mm.
and they're just being fed an algorithm versus like somebody, just happening upon it, like you're looking through in a record store, like, oh, that album cover looks kind of cool, no idea what it sounds like, I'll buy it.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned about the way that people dressed and so forth, because my moment was, um, I wish I could remember the show, but I'm pretty sure The Cure had played, and there were about a half dozen kids throughout the school wearing the Cure concert T-shirts. And I said to a friend of mine who had one, I was like, "What is this?" And he was like, "I'll make you a mixtape." And so it was Cure and Depeche Mode, and then we got into Dead Milkmen and Dead Kennedys and
Mhm.
all these other bands, and that led to this and led to that. And within weeks, months, my hair was different. I was dressing differently. I was starting to hang out with
Mhm.
different people. I was seeking these things out, and it was that moment. But there was a real, divide. To go back to the John Hughes thing, these people dress like this and these people dress like that, and I think it was, you find your identity through the music,
Yes.
and through these, subcultures within high schools. So I'm glad you brought that up.
You
And
really hit the nail on the head with that.
back at that time too, something as simple as piercing your ear, dyeing your hair
Mhm.
blue black, something like that really stood out as as something different. And now I think we're just in a world where it takes a lot more than that to differentiate yourself.
You start wearing Chuck Taylors to school, and other people are starting to talk to you now that you hadn't talked to before.
Exactly.
Exactly, exactly. I
Exactly.
think Sharon and I both lived in Chuck Taylors.
I did. I
Yeah.
in high school I used to wear like one black, one red. Just
Ah,
because why not?
And it's funny, I still have a few pairs and I hardly ever wear them because it's like I'm elderly and brittle and they have no support, but I still love them.
you got to do it for the
That's
scene,
funny.
man. You got to stay current.
Yeah.
Stephen, you mentioned something before, sort of this idea of bands getting too popular, and again, for my students and younger people today, they're like, why wouldn't you want to be earth-shatteringly famous? Why wouldn't you want to make tons and tons of money and be as popular as possible? But there was definitely an ethos to like the alternative scene. I don't know if either would you would mind talking about that.
Speaking for myself, it took me a long time to grow up and come full circle, but I tuned out a lot of bands like when Depeche Mode got popular with like music for the masses, like
Mhm.
not long well, I shouldn't say that. Not long after Violator. And yeah, I was just like, "Ugh, everybody knows them now. I can't be bothered." Like stupid, just really, really stupid and immature. But when you're in your late teens, early 20s, you kind of are dumb like that. And there were a lot of artists that, like the Beastie Boys, I refused to listen to the Beastie Boys because License to Ill, Fight for Your Right to Party, that was like voted favorite
Mhm.
song, best album for my graduating class. Then I didn't realize that the Beastie Boys were actually making fun of everybody that loved it. And then
Mhm.
I discovered Paul's Boutique. I wouldn't listen to Madonna, although Renee Dupuis will tell you that when Vogue came out, many, many times I was standing on her desk in the music office and voguing.
Mhm.
So I learned to love Madonna, but as a teenager, all my friends were learning the moves to Lucky Star and like a Virgin and all those videos, and I was like, "Ugh, I can't be bothered. I'm into this cool music." So it's a maturity thing, I guess, for
Well,
me.
I kind of feel like for me, I felt like somebody who never fit in. And there are teenagers who are popular, and they do fit in, and I just was not one of those people. And I think when you're not one of those people, you're more likely to sink into this music,
Mhm.
and you kind of feel like this is music that speaks to me, and I finally feel comfortable with this. I feel like this is mine. And so when you see those bands that you felt like they were for you hitting the mainstream and going top 40, you were kind of like, no, that's not for you. Can I have this one thing?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
You get proprietary about it. Like, no, they were my band. They were there for me, not you guys. And so suddenly, you hear it on Z100 and you're like, oh, I don't really like that. So and yeah, I think some of that is a maturity thing. You're a teenager. You want something that's there for you when you feel like so many things haven't been.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
And there's that line, I won't get it right, from Almost Famous, that, when you would, do anything for a band, when their music means so much to you, and then you've been devoted to this band for, 6 months, 6 years, whatever it is, and then someone else just hears it on the radio, they're like, that's my favorite band. I took that sort of stuff personally. Like, you haven't invested, you haven't put in the time, you didn't go see them at some crappy club in the middle of nowhere. Like, I've been there, and there's that connection, whether that's mature or relatable or not. That's certainly, I think, how a lot of us felt. Like, we've put in the time and you haven't.
Right.
Yeah.
We're the true fans, not you.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, but it's also like, how Hot Topic and all those stores, they've just, between, the Unknown Pleasures album cover and the Ramones and
Hmm.
just all these bands. I mean, a couple of years ago, I had one of my younger nieces call me asking me, "Do you have any rock band t-shirts, like vintage t-shirts?" I said yes, and she's like, "Can I have them?" I said no, and she was like, "Wait, what? You're saying no?" I'm like, "First of all, you don't know any of the bands. Second of all, you're not going to want any of them. Like, I don't have Def Leppard and Motley Crue t-shirts."
Hmm.
But also, that was, so kind of going back to like the scene, you were a poser if you were wearing a shirt and you didn't know the band,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that that was right. Again, it's a mature thing, but it's to Stephen's point. It's like, you're not that true fan. And it's like, you just kind of thought about that. It was an identity. And that was, there's so much blending of everything now, which I think is great. But at the time in the analog world, you had to find your identity in any way that you could. And music is what really, really defined it, at least for our generation, I think.
Right. And how dare you wear that Joy Division shirt if you don't know any of the songs by them? Take that off.
Right,
You know,
right.
there's a I saw recently on Reddit, well, I'll try to censor this. There's a group that's basically "Am I the A-hole?"
Yeah.
And a
Mm.
woman said that she had a Susie and the Banshees t-shirt, I think it was, or something like that. And her daughter wanted to wear it, and she was like, "Name 3 songs," and the daughter couldn't do it, and she was like, "Well, forget it then.
Yeah.
You're not wearing it." And then that's why she came back and she was like, "Am I the a-hole?" And responses were very mixed, but frankly, I didn't think she was.
Well, I would say yes, but it's well earned, and you should stand by being the a-hole in that situation. I think there's a certain rule to it, that you need to stand by. I see students
Right.
and young people like, well, how many Ramon songs do you know? How do you know? What do you know about Nirvana? They're like, isn't it a clothing label? They're like,
Oh my
it's just,
God.
yeah, that's, so many people have the Nirvana shirt and they don't know what it is, or Pink Floyd, or any number of things. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
both
Well, they're
both
selling those
are.
shirts at those shirts are sold at Target now,
Yeah,
so it's just a different feel.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what's interesting though, I don't know if you guys notice this as much, but music from our era, and I'm speaking specifically of like the late 80s,
Hmm.
is it's always coming back. Like that era, like think back to the 80s, were we dressing like the 50s? Like the
No.
80s is always coming back. Like every 10 years, people are into whether it's the fashion or the music of the 80s. It never goes away. And the alternative music of the 80s and even some of the 70s, like it's on commercials more and more and more. And I know a lot of it is because our generation are, the creative directors at
Yeah.
agencies and brands and things like that.
Hmm.
But it, I don't know, there's something about that time. It's always there.
It's true. Younger people are still continuing to embrace what we liked at that time, and I actually love that.
Hmm.
Yeah. We're always relevant. Gen X is always, we're always forgotten, but we're always relevant.
Amen.
It's
Amen.
true, and I'm so thankful to be part of Gen X, honestly. And it's not even like we're on the fringes. I mean, Sharon and I, we are squarely in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. It's musically, culturally, and fashion. And like, I live in California. I fly in and out of Burbank Airport a lot. I've been there for almost 20 years. Every time I am at that airport, the music is always 80s new wave. Every single time for the entire time that I have lived there. To Stephen's point earlier, John Hughes movies. I used to run an outdoor movie festival, and those were our most popular films. A lot of the movies from the 80s, it's parents sharing them with their kids. And while there may be some, culturally inappropriate things, viewed through today's lens, the stories are still something that people can relate to all the time. And then musically, it's fantastic. So yeah, we're lucky to be where Gen X in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
There's actually a fantastic compilation, and I think it's called "Life Moves Pretty Fast." I don't know if you guys have seen it, and it's somebody compiled all of the songs from all of the John Hughes films,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's like one big box set. It's absolutely incredible.
I'll have
All
to
right,
look
I'm
for
gonna look
that.
that up as soon as we're done. That's something to look forward to. Here's another question. My wife and I get into this all the time because there's certain 80s music and early 90s music that you know exactly when that song came out based on the instrumentation or the production. You know exactly when that's from. And there's some music that's sort of timeless. Like when the latest Depeche Mode record came out, there's a lot of that. I was like, that could have come out 25, 30 years ago. It fits because it's timeless. And then there's some Depeche Mode songs that's like, that is squarely in 1985 or whatever it might be. Do you guys have thoughts about that, or is it just it's all good and you enjoy it no matter what?
I think you can. I think with all music, you can kind of hear if you listen to a lot of music and you have speaking for myself, a pretty wide variety of music that you listen to. I think you can kind of identify the era, and then there are times that you'll listen to something newer, and it's like, oh, that kind of like I hear the
Yeah.
influences. So yeah, I mean you can hear it sometimes, especially like the early like electronic, plinkety plonk, plinkety plinkety
Yeah.
of the synthesizer.
If we use like Depeche Mode as an example, I kind of feel like the Memento Mori, which is the last Depeche Mode album that came out, it's about a year old now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, it's the first album by them in a very long time that I listened to and said, "Yes, I love this." Because I think the last one that I enjoyed was Ultra, and I kept continued to come out with albums that just didn't really work for me. But the most recent one, I listened to it and I thought, "This is like Black Celebration if it were recorded for now."
Hmm.
And so it's like I could hear the influence from back then, even though it sounds completely fresh and new.
That's so
So
interesting because Depeche Mode's a band that like I've kind of ebbs and flows. Like I listen to it, I don't. Always winds up on our best ofs, but I haven't spent a ton of time with each of their records. In let's just say the 2000s. I loved Spirit, and Memento Mori really disappointed me. I really wanted
really,
to like it. Yeah, it's really interesting. I
yeah, it
just
went the opposite with me. I was like,
huh.
wow, I love it because I kind of was losing faith, and I was just like, I guess they're just going in a direction now that I'm not going to enjoy. So I was really surprised that Memento Mori really worked for me. It's funny that we had opposite opinions on it.
Yeah, yeah. What about and The Cure? I admit, I mean, I love them. Have not listened to their more current releases as much, but I will say when I hadn't seen them for years, and there are a number of bands that have continued touring, like Depeche Mode and The Cure, that and U2 for that matter, that like I didn't continue going to see them. I just kind of got, I don't want to say bored, but I was less interested in their music, and I regret not seeing them
Hmm.
for the better part of the last 20 years. But the first time I had seen The Cure in like 15 years was there was I forgot what the name of the festival was that they produced or curated out in Pasadena. I mean, and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, I remember seeing them in Giants Stadium, but I'm like, how do all these people know them? And
Mm.
like I'm still blown away at the crowds that they draw, but then of course I'm reminded that they've been putting out music for like 40 plus years, and I'm not that young anymore, and people discover music. So it's weird, I mean that's probably a whole other tangent we could go down, is just how these fans have sustained, and the fan base has grown exponentially. I mean, like Nick Cave is another one. I'm like, he just seems so more eclectic in a lot of ways that I'm always
Mm.
surprised at the crowds he draws each time I've seen him. But I shouldn't be, I guess.
Yeah, I think things have changed appreciably, in terms of who gets to find music and over the last 15, 20 years. And we're just having a conversation with friends with Todd Packer and and Jen Murphy Packer, and their kid went to see Olivia Rodrigo, and the Breeders opened up.
Huh.
And at first I was just thinking that can't be the Breeders opening up for, but it sort of made sense in certain ways. And here's a whole nother generation of music listeners that are going to find this band. And I think it's interesting that in today's world that sort of thing can happen. Whereas, 25, 30 years ago, that would not have happened at all. Those things just were not happening. The nearest I can think of would have been Pixies opening up for U2 in, I think, 92 or 93. And that just made no sense to me at that time. But I don't think those things happen. I think those things happen more now than they used to.
Well, festivals have gotten a lot more eclectic.
Yeah.
Even you look at a lineup like for Coachella. I mean, you're really going to see a lot of things that you're like, wait, how did these things work together? But I think people like that kind of variation.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I think, whereas when we were coming up and coming of age and listening to music, we were very siloed because our identity was defined by our music and vice versa. Whereas now it's like everybody listens to everything.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be a Taylor Swift fan, but you might also be a Pixies fan. You might be a Cure fan, and you might be an Olivia Rodrigo fan, or, whoever, Bruce Springsteen. Like
Right.
it's a lot more accepting, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back, since we've mentioned some big concerts and things like that. And you guys seem to have gone to all the cool shows back in the late 1980s. Were there any shows or tours that you missed that you kind of still kick yourself about?
For me, not that many, just because it was so cheap to go see a show back then,
Yeah.
even when you consider the currency value at the time. It
Yeah.
was not like now. We were able to get concert tickets. I mean, the part that sucked was having to stand online for a guy. It wasn't like now where you buy everything online. You had to go stand somewhere and wait at a Ticketmaster, to go buy a ticket for something. But the bar for entry to just go to a show was so low because the tickets were so cheap. It's
Mhm.
become a really unappealing business now,
Yeah.
where it's a fortune just to go see a show. But because it was so easy back then, and also when you're young and you can be fresh as a daisy after being out until 3 in the morning, you're going to go to whatever show you feel like going to. And I went to. There aren't many that I'm like, oh, I really should have gone to that. I really availed myself of a lot, and I'm thankful.
Hmm.
Yeah, I I have a binder filled with ticket stubs and passes and stuff, but I was on, and I'm not saying this in a braggy way because I know both of you guys were as well. I was on guest lists all the time. And then during music conferences like CMJ and the New Music Seminar, and when I worked in the music industry, going out to the Gavin convention, and I've seen so many bands and I just don't remember a lot. I'm like, did I see them? I don't remember. The one I would say that I didn't get to see, and I remember I was like, I'll catch them next time, was Nirvana.
Yep. Same.
But there are a lot of bands that I got to see, early on in small venues. Feeling very, very lucky. One of the only people I know that got to see the Smiths when they played on the
Hmm.
pier. Saw Susie and the Banshees there, saw the Cure there. Like, so kind of going back to, we had so many great venues that we could go to on Long Island. The city was not far away. Even going to New Jersey wasn't a big deal. So we were super fortunate. But yeah, I don't know if there's anybody else that I'm like, I didn't get to see them. And then I've kind of been making it up, the last number of years, as a lot of bands are coming around doing album tours. I would say the only other band that, from the early 90s that I never got to see still to this day would be the Flaming Lips.
Oh, that's a show.
I know, and
Iconic
for whatever
show.
reason,
Yeah.
it's like I just never saw them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the cost of concert tickets, it's crazy, crazy, crazy expensive. And my career is, I'm an event producer, and so I know what it takes to produce an event. Um, However, there's like, you could see what the Cure did this year with their merch, or last year. Every t-shirt was $25. It was all reasonably priced, and knowing what it costs to produce a t-shirt and then to produce them on that scale. I mean, it probably cost them pennies to produce them, and yet, they probably made a decent profit, and then everybody else could at least
Mhm.
get paid versus, I love you too, but it was really egregious, their merch, not to mention the ticket prices at the Sphere, which I did go to because, I've been a lifelong U2 fan, but I did not get, I got a quote unquote cheap seat, and that was still over $200 before
merch
fees.
is merch has gotten really crazy expensive, but it really, and I guess tickets have too. I don't think that there's, not that this is a fortune, but I don't think there's been a show that I've gone to in the last couple of years that the ticket was less than $60 for a
Mm.
general admission show in the city. Um, I saw Ladytron there and Slowdive there a few months ago, and those tickets were probably around $60 general admission, which, by today's standards aren't that bad.
Right.
But I have old ticket stubs just like Sharon does, and I look and I see that I paid $14 to go see the beautiful South at Tramps.
Mm.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think the economics of the business have changed too, that there's not a lot of money from album or single sales anymore. So the way some bands make their money is through touring, but then, like you say, the U2s and the egregious prices and so forth, it's gotten kind of out of whack, but it was certainly different back then. When you guys were at the station, do you remember discovering new bands or new sounds or new trends while you were DJing at the station?
Oh, definitely. For
Yeah.
me, I feel like the station was where I really got heavily into shoegaze and industrial.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Um, the entire shoegaze genre. I think of that was where I really, the first time I played Slow Dives just for a day, I was like, I'm in love with this, and it lasted. I'm still a huge fan. Kitchens of Distinction, Ride, My Bloody Valentine, and then like on the industrial side, obviously I mentioned Nine Inch Nails earlier, Front 242, Frontline
Mhm.
Assembly, Skinny Puppy, Nights Are Up, all of that. Like that I really got to take a deeper dive being at the station there. And Sharon and I also worked at a commercial station that might have played these bands, but they play like a track or two, or
Mhm.
they would part it where you could only hear Down in It by Nine Inch Nails after 11 o'clock at night, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
Whereas at RHU it was sort of, as long as it didn't have any profanity in the title or the lyrics, anything was fair game, whatever we wanted to play. And so, I was able to play, and listen to other tracks by these bands that I wouldn't have heard at the commercial station or just from any other station in general.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. All the same genres, same bands. One thing I do remember when I first started, before I was actually on air and I was working in the music department with Tim McDonald, is I was logging in all the records, and then
Mm.
Tim and Lori and Darren and Butch and we would do these record listening parties, and they were all older than me, so that was always really fun because I would get their influence. And one band that sticks out to me is Spacemen 3, which, when they split up, went on to be Spiritualized and Spectrum. And Spiritualized has been like my all-time favorite band. I mean, I've traveled around the country to see this band. I don't want to say they're my Grateful Dead because I was never a Grateful Dead fan, but I've seen them so many times, and I definitely have WRHU to thank for opening my eyes and ears to Spaceman 3 and that kind of, I wouldn't call it not quite shoegazy, space rock is more like
Mhm.
it. But yeah, the noisy My Bloody Valentine, Ride. I just saw Ride for the first time actually a couple of months ago. Had never seen them before, and they sounded fantastic. They still sound fantastic, and they've got a new record out, and I've only heard one track so far, but you know, I love that these bands are either still making music or, um, you know, reforming and putting new stuff out. So yeah, all of that. There's been a lot of really great music discovered at the station, and all the wax track stuff as
Mhm.
well. We got to play
Oh yeah.
so much of that. And there was a big industrial scene. I mean, like, Paris, New York used to play a ton of industrial stuff. The building in New York City, and then I think there was another place out on the island. It eventually became Caffeine, I think.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and then they had like a chill out room called Sanka. I don't know if you remember that
Yeah.
at Caffeine. I DJ'd there. DJ'd there for one night, and it was something was wrong with the air conditioning, and it was like June. It
Oh
was like
God.
an oven in there, but oh, it was so fun. But it's just so funny to think I had to carry crates and crates of vinyl in there, and
Uh-huh.
now like if you're going to DJ an event, what do you have to bring? You know, it's just so funny to think how much work it was to do a gig like that.
Yeah, very different. What did you spin when you DJ'd out there?
When I was there for that night, it was on a Friday, I think, and I played mostly industrial alternative. It was heavily wax tracks. Um, yeah, I wish I could remember more about what I played, but I mean, it was definitely in that era.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah, good times.
You guys mentioned some really good clubs there. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that club scene, and you mentioned a little bit about finding new music when you went out. But where are the places that you look forward to, hearing the new thing or seeing what the crowd was up to?
Oh my God. I mean, I back in the 1980s, New York State did not have photographs on their driver's licenses. So I had my mother's license and I paid somebody to change it. And she was born in 1939 and I paid somebody to change it to 1963. So I was 23 at the age of 16. And I used it because I wanted to go see shows at any clubs that may have been either 18 or 21 and over. But I really wanted to just go out and hear music and dance. So at that point, I had friends that could drive. I think I was eventually driving, yeah, around that age too. So I would go. I grew up in Long Beach, so right down the street, Malibu. Tuesday nights at the Loop, um, Friday and Saturday nights. I would go there. Spies. I don't remember which day of the week. Spit.
I loved Spies. Spies was my
Yeah, Spies
favorite.
was
Spies was
great.
my favorite of all the Long Island clubs because it wasn't as big as Malibu. The music was
Yeah,
always so good, though.
yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Paris, New York was great with DJ Slave out in Huntington. 007, it depended. It could go either way. Thrush in Rockville Center was always a good one. Um, so yeah, it was just fun to hear what was going on. I eventually worked at Malibu for a short time when I was like 20. But yeah, it was fun just to to your point, see what other people were wearing. Get ideas
Mhm.
for fashion, and and hearing what the DJ wanted to play. It was always
I
great.
loved going to the bank on the Lower East Side.
Oh yeah.
So the bank was always great. The bank always had the best music, and then they had because it was an old bank that had been converted into a nightclub.
Mhm.
They had a pretty big vault, and that was where they played all the dark wave.
Yep.
But I loved going there for years.
Yeah, I used to go. Sometimes I would go. Well, I went to the Limelight for many, many years,
Mhm.
and I definitely was going there when I was legal as well as underage. Um, what is it? Oh my God, it's an NYU dorm now. The
Mm.
Palladium, Mars on the West
Continental.
Side, Continental. So it wasn't always, straight new music. It was a lot of dance music. Like I remember Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock, It Takes Two, and Pump Up the Volume and things like that. So that was also where I was also starting to discover there's that crossover of dance music, and a lot of my musical taste eventually evolved in the early 90s to incorporate more, things like the Chemical Brothers and Fatboy Slim and stuff like that. So it's just evolved.
It's funny that we're talking about we're talking about this, and we were just talking about the clubs, and you were just mentioning the crossover. I just told somebody like maybe it was 2 days ago about having gone to Spies, and it was I guess it was around 1990, and they were playing their usual music, but then suddenly they put on "Delight Groove Is in the Heart,"
Yes.
Mm.
and two guys, they weren't skinheads, but like they had shaved heads and they were wearing leather jackets. They were dressed like everybody else there. In unison, just screamed, "This song sucks!" And it was just, it was they it was quite a pushback against about the against the just the infiltration of that kind of dance music into what they typically were playing. But
Hmm.
I feel like that was sort of the beginning of really mixing dance music and what had been alternative previously. Like there was, I feel like that started to blur the lines between the two a little.
Yeah, I would agree. I was working at Malibu at that time when like it was like 90, 91. It was Delight, um, Soul to Soul, Back to Life.
Mhm.
Mhm.
There was another one, I can't think of the name of it.
Nina Cherry.
Yeah, Nana Cherry. Yeah, you're right. That it was starting to blend more, and it helped my musical taste expand.
Yeah, I think that's. I also became familiar with Massive Attack from working at the station because we got a copy of Blue Lines and I had never heard them.
Mm.
But that it, then that's more trippy and electronic. But I feel like that was also something that started to work its way into what previously was considered alternative.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I would
I
agree
think a
there.
lot of the bands that you guys just mentioned there were born from alternative scenes, but sort of got popular really, really quickly. And it's
Yeah.
kind of funny that there was the pushback against that sort of, sellout idea, but those were all things that came from really sort of niche places that weren't
Mhm.
generally popular yet. So yeah, there was definitely like a I don't know, a cool tax. Like if this is too cool, if it's too popular, it's not going to play in certain places. It's just so
Right.
different now.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I'm in my head, it's like I have this timeline of years that I'm thinking about, and it's kind of like, while yeah, we danced to New Order and The Cure. I mean, they're not the quote unquote danciest artists,
Right.
as you think about dance music now. But then thinking there was like the Soup Dragons and the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses and some Primal Scream stuff, and it was kind of like that's when it started, kind of like expanding, and that whole Manchester scene, the whole acid house, and there was, that crossing into a lot of the alternative acts and the influences there, and then kind of the expansion of that alt music scene at the time. It was kind of like it went that way or the grunge direction, and it was,
Hmm.
but yet we listened to all of it. At least that, speaking for myself.
And those Manchester bands are all touring again, it
Yeah,
seems. So,
I just saw Jesus Jones last week.
Hmm.
oh
Not
right,
that they're from Manchester, but
they're going to
yeah.
be playing here as well. I went to see the London Suede the last when they
Oh
toured
wow.
here. I
Mhm.
because that's one of my all-time favorite bands, and actually I got to really know them when I was at the station also.
Oh
It
cool.
was yeah, it was very early, Suede, but it was before they had to call themselves the London Suede.
Right.
But I think that, and that was also interesting to me because here was this lead singer who had this like serious androgyny, and there just wasn't much of that, and the way Brett Anderson delivered things and moved around on the stage, and it's so funny because he still is like that even in concert.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you guys have talked about a number of different genres and trends during your time at Hofstra Radio in the late '80s, early '90s. But Sharon, you kind of touched on this too. That all of a sudden there was the grunge movement, and that's really when I that was that summer of '91 when I was starting to produce Airwave and things started. The records that came in, Seal's first record came in, and Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and I think there was a Charlatans record I was really excited about, and then in August, I think, is when Nevermind came in '91. Do you guys remember having a sense of things changing or this new influence coming in while you were at the station?
I remember Soundgarden. I remember Mudhoney. I remember the Sub Pop Singles Club,
Hmm.
Mother Love Bone. So I don't remember the first. I don't remember Bleach as well, but I definitely remember the Sub Pop Singles Club and all the stuff that was coming in. Tad,
Hmm.
just all that stuff. Yeah, I remember having a distinct, clear memory of that era.
Yeah, I remember that when we got the soundtrack to the movie Singles, and
Oh yeah.
I fell in love with it, and it had all of that on it, the Alice in Chains track that leads it off, and so
Yeah.
I really loved it, and I can't say that I was a huge fan of grunge overall. What I liked, I really liked though.
I would agree.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit later than that both of you departed from Hofstra Radio for obviously the reasons you said before, but I'm wondering if you got a sense of, when you're in something and obviously you appreciated it and you spent a lot of time at the station and got to know a lot, but I'm wondering if your sense of Hofstra Radio and that genre of music, did that change once you left the radio station, when you became, quote unquote adults, when you're, grown-ups and out of the college radio station? Did you have a different appreciation?
I think I will always appreciate my time there. It made college more interesting. It made the first few years out of college more interesting. I think, personally for me, like when I think about, um, my sense of WRHU once I was no longer a student, the only big difference, and I'll admit I'm a little salty over it, is that the station got so much more investment after we were there. I think we all three of us can agree on that. I mean, I love my memories of RHU, but it was a dusty, cramped dungeon to work in. And we had an almost windowless basement with old boards, equipment from I don't know when. And it was like that for a long time. I will say we sounded fantastic, given that we were working on really old equipment and we had great instructors. But
Mhm.
I went back years later, and it was state of the art, and it is today. But we were working with a pretty primitive surrounding.
Yeah, I remember when the main broadcast studio went from pots to slides
Yeah.
for the board. So I'm true. I mean, like I said, I'm dating myself. I started there in '86. So
Mm.
yeah. And then when that whole new communications pavilion was built, versus to your point, Stephen, that dungeon we were in, the basement. And there weren't any windows. I liked that. I mean, like I kind of liked that, dark, dank, soundproofed. It was quiet in all the different studios, but I always liked the tactical of, editing tape,
Oh yeah.
of slicing it and putting that, in like in the wax pen. Like
Mm.
I've always enjoyed that. I, have never edited on, not really in any real way, digital. So I liked that part of it. But yeah, I agree. It became so much more. I mean, I know we had a 4-track studio. I don't even remember if there was an 8-track
I
studio
don't
at
think
that
I
time. I'm
don't think
sure
we
there
I
was.
don't remember us having one. I remember the 4-track though. And we had
Yeah,
two, we had,
yeah.
we had two
So
and four, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, it was
exactly.
really it was really early days. It's funny that you mentioned the tape editing, because that was actually one of my strongest skills, was tape editing, and I
Yeah.
still have my editing kit.
Do
But
Hmm.
you
yeah,
really? I still have a ton of reels.
I don't have much tape, but it's funny. I still have the plastic box with the editing block, the grease pencil, and a bunch of razor blades. I just never got rid of it. But I
That's so
don't know.
funny.
I'll never have an opportunity to use it again. But and it's funny because I will sometimes edit audio now for work. It's not very often, and I use Adobe Audition, and of course it's easier. But for me, it was just more fun when I was actually having to mark a piece of tape and then literally cut it with a razor.
Yeah, yeah. Because you had to be sure. Like, sure, you could make a
Mm,
mistake, but if your blade is, the slightest bit dull and you don't know it and you slice it and then you get that frayed
right.
edge and then you try and piece it back together and like there's kind of like a little drop that
Mhm.
only you can hear, but everybody's going to hear it. Yeah, it was nerve wracking, but it was exciting.
There was an art to it, and it's just different when you're editing
Hmm.
things digitally.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
I think some of the skill that you learn, and like you said, having to be sure of that cut and listening back and having your ears open, I think that translates to a number of other things. And I'm sure in your later careers that ability to listen and pay attention to detail and pacing. I'm sure students today have opportunities to do those things. But for me, again, like you're saying, working on a 2-track tape, you're like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to plan this and make this work? I think there was definitely something worthwhile to it. Aside from the ease of doing things digitally, doing things the harder way, I think builds up other skills and prepares you for more
Well,
things.
the stakes were certainly higher because, I mean, now you have Command Z, but
Yep.
if you messed up on an edit, what were you going to do? You've cut the tape.
Yeah, I think, to what you were saying before, the state of the art facilities they have now are wonderful. The opportunities, the amount that the sports department, news department, that they can do and produce on a daily basis is just absolutely
Hmm.
phenomenal. It's a wonderful opportunity. But I think, as you guys were saying, working in that basement and it's dark and there's nobody else around, that's your world, and you're creating there and sending it out into the world. I think there was really something very special and magical about, well, we only have so much,
Hmm.
but we still have
Yeah.
to realize our dreams. We're going to make it work.
It's true. I mean, the one thing I appreciated was really the true free form nature of, those 2 or 3 hours. When I first started, I think Airwave was from 10 to 2 or 11 to 2. And then they expanded it to 4 hours, and it was like, 11 to 1, 1
Hmm.
to 3. But I did go back to the station a couple of years ago where they were inviting alumni to come back and do a show. And I'll say it was kind of just, it was disappointing in that I couldn't play whatever I wanted. And there was a limit to what they had. And even though it was during the day, I don't think they still do an airwave type show, but I was disappointed that a college radio station does not have a free form format. So no disrespect to anybody that's running the station now for whatever the reasons are that they're doing it that way. That's fine. But I really, really, really appreciated the fact that we, with the exception of like, here are songs that we need to play. You could
Hmm.
plug them in at any point within your set, so you could curate the flow of your
Hmm.
show.
Yeah, we had a
And
lot of autonomy.
yeah, yeah.
I could keep you two here for hours. I think we got through about 40% of the questions that I had planned. I'm so honored. I'm so thrilled that you guys took the time to share these stories. And I'm going to go dig out some records and listen to them tonight. And I'm going to go look for that John Hughes soundtrack. This was so much fun. Sharon, Stephen, thank you guys so much for this conversation. And again, as I said, 30 years ago, for being so important. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you. This has been great fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Can we do this like once a month and just like talk about
We
music?
could. We have enough to talk about for sure.
Oh my God, like nonstop. Yeah, no, thank you so much. This was really, really great fun. I love having these conversations, and it's always nice because um, one of the things that I've recently been thinking about a lot due to things that have taken place in my personal life is other people have your memories.
Mm.
And, whether it's personal one on one or just memories of a time, it's really nice, I guess maybe it's just a symptom of age, but it's really nice to have these conversations and to be able to talk with you guys and have your different perspectives and where you were at that time and being able to talk about this. So it's been really great. Thank you so much for inviting me.